All right, so today we are talking about immigration. And so our essential question for today is what is the American dream and who has access to that American dream? So here are our standards that we are addressing today. A lot of the same standards that we've been addressing over the course of this unit, but obviously we're focusing a lot today on mobility and the American dream and that perception of it and access to it. So, big question that we're going to have in discussion is what is the American dream? So, what does that term American dream mean? And does it mean the same thing for everybody? So, some people could argue that the American dream is to have a beautiful house, white picket fence, 2, 3 children, married, so on and so forth. Some people's American dream is just to be able to practice whatever religion they want. Some people's American dream is to be super, super wealthy and have a lot of money and own a lot of property and things like that. So the American dream can kind of defer depending on you, your situation in America, your the history of America based on your specific group, where you are in the position in America, so on and so forth. So think about, as we go through this, what is the American dream and can it be different for different people? All right, so there is a video clip here that talks about immigrants in coming into America, and you can just watch that. It's linked into that slideshow presentation. So let's go ahead and get going in these notes. So the promised land, as the U.S. expanded west, more and more people came to America. So America, the East Coast is starting to open up, and most were seeking freedom and opportunities, which when we were talking about last week with the migration settlers and the homestead, we talked about freedom, opportunities, jobs, things like that when we talked about what motivates people to move. So just remember that these immigrants are coming for a lot of those different reasons as well. So there were a few different waves of immigrants. So you had immigrants coming in different ways from different areas. So this first group that we're going to talk about are old immigrants, and not because they're old as an age, but they're the first wave to kind of come in this Gilded Age era. So they are Protestants as far as their faith. They're from Northern and Western Europe. Many of them are skilled laborers, so they have a skill that they possess that they're very, very good at, and like being a blacksmith or a carpenter, things like that. So they kind of specialize in certain skills. A lot of them are farmers, which again is a skill. They assimilated easily. So remember when we talked about the Dawes Act with the Native Americans, we talked about assimilation. That's going to come up quite a few times. So assimilation is where when you assimilate, you drop your culture to become part of the dominant culture. So they were able to be Americanized very quickly and very easily because a lot of what has now become American culture is what they're used to anyway. In the 1840s, Irish and Germans began to arrive. Initially, they faced discrimination, but eventually they blended into American society. So with the different waves of immigrants, they're all going to face a little discrimination when they first come in because they're different language, different place, they're new. Some immigrants are going to assimilate a lot more easily and quickly than others. Some are going to be accepted a lot more quickly and easily than others. All right, so the new immigrants, on the other hand, they come from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they're from areas like Italy, Greece, Poland, Hungary. They're unskilled, so they can do basic work, but they don't specialize in anything, which is going to come up when it comes to immigrating because they don't specialize in special skills, so they just do your basic, just any type of factory job or things like that. Many of them are poor. They're Catholic and Jewish, many of them, so different religious faith, different belief systems. They settled in the cities instead of the farms. Remember, they're not farmers. They don't have that skill, so they're not interested in moving out west like some of these other old immigrants are because they don't have that skill. So they crowd the cities. They settle in these cities, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Many of them came alone. They wanted to save money and then send for family later. And many native-born Americans felt threatened by this new wave of immigrants that were coming in. So, reasons to move to America. Last week, we talked about push and pull factors as far as moving from the East Coast out west for the homesteaders. Now, we're going to talk about push and pull factors as far as immigrants coming into America are concerned. So, push factors, remember, they're going to be negative things that cause you to want to leave. They push you out of your home. So famine, this is a lack of food source, and not just like there's a scarcity of it, like there's no food that exists. So for example, the Irish first came to America because there was a huge potato famine in Ireland, and potatoes are a huge part of their food source. And so without that, they're starving, so they need to leave. Wars, religious persecution, which we've talked about persecution before. Remember, that's mistreatment, and it can be simply being mistreated, or it can be like being exiled, which means like being kicked out of your country, or it can go all the way to you are being physically harmed up to death. So sometimes religious persecution can have many levels. Also, farming problems. So famine means there's like a complete depletion of a resource, whereas farming problems is going to be things like weather issues, or you just have a scarcity of it, things like that. So these are bad things that are happening at home, forcing you to leave, pushing you out. Pull factors, on the other hand, are good things that are going on wherever you choose to go. So they're pulling you in. So there are reasons to come to a new place. So hope for opportunity, land. Remember, we've got that Homestead Act. So we've got all this free land that they're just giving away. Friends and family who already live here, and religious and political freedom. I know that a lot of people have a lot of complaints about America and many different things about America, but there are a lot of freedoms that we have here that many don't have in other areas of the world. So push factors are going to be bad things happening at home that cause you to leave, pushing you out. Pull factors are going to be good things going on where you choose to move, pulling you in. So the most important reason to move to America at the time, jobs. So we talked yesterday about this growth of industry and how immigrants provided that cheap labor and jobs. We've got these new industries. We've got all these factories, all this construction. We're building, we're growing up and out in America, and we need workers. And in order for these business owners to make the most money, they have to have cheap labor. And so immigrants provide that cheap labor. So the journey to America, it was not the most enjoyable. This is not a Carnival Royal Caribbean cruise line that they are traveling on. They needed money for the passage and New Start, which many don't have. They could bring only what they could carry. Could you imagine moving across the world, across the oceans, across the seas to a brand new place, and all you can carry with you is all you can take with you is what you can physically carry yourself? You also got to think about families with small children. They've got to carry their stuff and small children's things as well. Now, I know me personally, I like that big screen TV in my living room, and I can't very well carry that. So that's going to be a problem for me. So you can only carry a few clothes, few photos, tools, things like that. Most traveled at the bottom of the boat, which we know is not the safest area to be in on a ship. So they had the worst accommodations. Now, some people made a little more money and they could go a little higher on the boat. But for the most part, most of these immigrants, like if they were in a good situation where they weren't trying to leave. So they were in the lower decks. There's no privacy. It's extremely crowded. It's dirty, and illness. Got to think, there's no indoor plumbing and things like that at this time. So disease is spreading very quickly in this area because you're in close quarters. I mean, if you think about when COVID started to get really, really crazy earlier this year, there was that cruise ship they had to like quarantine because, and there's been many times over the past few years where there have been things that have spread through ships very quickly because you're in close quarters trapped on this boat with a bunch of people. So it's a hard journey to get here. Then they finally get here. They finally arrive. Ellis Island is the port that immigrants had to go through to get into the U.S. on the East Coast. This is on the New York Harbor. Usually people coming from Europe and Africa just because it's geographically closer. First and second class passengers were inspected quickly on the ship, and many were released very quickly. Third class passengers were sent to Ellis Island for inspections. So with the inspection, officials have to decide if you can even stay. So you got to be healthy. They don't want you bringing a bunch of diseases and things into the country. And you have to show that you either have money of your own, you have a skill that's going to make you money, or you have someone who's willing to take care of you until you can get on your feet. Okay, most people made it through. It wasn't like they turned away a bunch of people, but you still had to go through that. If anybody's ever traveled internationally and gone through customs, you understand, like even in today's world, it's nerve-wracking. So imagine back in in the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s. Angel Island is the same thing, but on the West Coast. This is where Chinese and Japanese immigrants, so immigrants coming from Asia, off the coast of San Francisco, California. They come for the same reasons as the Europeans. After the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which we're going to talk about more in depth tomorrow, after 1882, they turned away a lot of Chinese immigrants. The Gentleman's Agreement slowed down Japanese immigration. And a lot of times they faced a lot more discrimination, and it was a lot harder for them as opposed to the Europeans coming from on Ellis Island. So an immigrant's life. So then they get here, cool. But it is not the easiest of lives. So they have long, hard hours. They work 6, 7 days a week, many times, 12 or more hours a day. So you're working 12, 13, 14 hours in a factory, 6, 7 days a week, every single day. There's no vacation, there's no sick leave, there's no unemployment compensation or anything like that. If you can't come to work, you lose your job. It's very dangerous conditions working there. If you can see in the picture over here to the right, like they're working in this factory, but nobody seems to really have on a lot of safety or protective gear. So a lot of accidents. So in 1882, 675 workers were killed in accidents per week. And then low wages. So remember we talked about how there's this big gap between the rich and the poor, and the rich people are making a whole bunch and the poor are not making anything. Well, women in the year 1899 earned an average of $267 in that year. That's about 8,000, little under $8,500 in today's money. And that's for the whole year. Andrew Carnegie, on the other hand, which we'll talk about later this week, he's a big business owner, robber baron. He made $23 million that same year, which is over $700 million in today's money. So just to show that gap between the wealthy and the poor. Life in the cities was rough. Most immigrants were living in big cities like Chicago and New York and so on. It was very unsanitary. They're living in crowded living conditions, like you see in this photo over here to the left. Poor water quality. There's no sewage system. There's no trash pickup. So not only are you dealing with human waste, because if you got to do your business in the bucket and then you just throw the bucket out of the window, well, that's now on the street. You've got to deal with the waste from the industries as well. It's very dangerous. So to keep yourself warm, you got to do fires and things like that. And these fires spread. So there's a lot of huge fires that happen during this era as well. Okay, so today's activity is another Common Lit reading assignment, and this reading is on the rush of immigrants, okay? And so you're just going to do the guiding questions. So remember, we talked about Common Lit, and we did that in an assignment last week. Remember, there's all these cool features. You can have it read aloud the text to you. You can translate it to different languages. You can change the font size. You can change... you can highlight and annotate, take notes, and things like that. So today's assignment is just a reading activity on the rush of immigrants. It goes a little bit more in depth about immigration and the groups of people that were immigrating into America during the Gilded Age.